It always makes me smile as I see the attendee numbers pop up and up and up and up.
It's like having people beamed in.
Yes, yes. We appreciate you all joining this session. And why don't we get started? Since we do just have 45 minutes, and if possible, we'd like to have a little time for questions and answers. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this session titled Cancer Survivorship, Exploring and Rediscovering Your Purpose. My name is Kareem Sadak, and I'll be the moderator of this session. I'm the director of our Childhood Cancer Survivor Program at the University of Minnesota and our Masonic Cancer Center and Health Fairview Children's Hospital. So I'm a pediatric oncologist and get to work with childhood cancer survivors that are children, adolescents, young adults, and beyond. And so we are very excited to have Dr. Mary Jo Kreitzer here, the director of our Early Back-End Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota, where she also serves as a tenured professor in the School of Nursing, with so much of her work being so relevant and helpful and really important for cancer survivors, whether it's her focus on integrative health and certainly beyond. We are thrilled to have you, Mary Jo. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Mary Jo, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Kareem. It's really wonderful to be with you this morning. And exploring and rediscovering your purpose is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And there are lots of reasons in life to rethink purpose. And so when you think about it, anytime we undergo a big life change or big life transition, be that a marriage or a divorce, a change of job, a loss, or a diagnosis of cancer, any of those can be triggers that can prompt us to step back and rethink who are we, why are we here, what is my purpose in life. During the COVID-19 pandemic, you may have heard the phrase happening, and this is not just in the United States, but really globally, the Great Resignation. And many people are resigning from their jobs, the work that they've done. And many believe that that actually is happening because people are stopping and pausing and rethinking what is really important to be doing next in life. I actually like to think instead of the Great Resignation, to reframe that and think of that as the Great Reimagination, as we even sort of stretch ourselves to think of what can be happening next. The poet John O'Donohue, I just actually ran across this morning, and I thought this is so meaningful, maybe even to start the session today. He writes a lot about life and various aspects of life. And I found one poem this morning where he's talking about thresholds and triggers in life. And he said, it's wise in your own life to be able to recognize and acknowledge the key thresholds, to take time to feel all the varieties of presence that accrue there, to listen inward with complete attention until you hear the inner voice calling you forward. The time has come to cross. And so today I'm actually going to put this whole topic of purpose in a broader context of well-being. And you might wonder, like, why well-being? There's a growing understanding that 80 to 90% of how healthy people are is really related to factors that sit outside the healthcare system. So our social, our environmental, and their behavioral factors really, to a large extent, drive our health and well-being. If we were sitting around in a room together and I were to ask you, what contributes to your well-being? I think people would come up with lots of adjectives like happy, healthy, prosperous. Some people might say it's being in a state of balance, body, mind, and spirit. Other people might describe well-being as content, peaceful, connected to purpose, in harmony, safe. In one word, well-being is really about wholeness. One of my favorite definitions comes from the physician, Dr. Atul Gawande, who talks about well-being is the very reasons that we want to be alive. Well, I've been doing a lot of work and a lot of research and a lot of teaching on well-being really for the last 2 decades. And When you look at what impacts well being, there are six factors that prominently emerge, and purpose is one of those. And so, while I'm going to do a deep dive into purpose today, I just want to give you a sense of what those other contributors are of well being. Certainly, health is connected to our well being, and you can think of health as physical, social, emotional, spiritual health. And there's lots of evidence of what we eat and how much we move and how we manage our stress and how well we sleep, big contributors to well being. But I bet you can think of people that you know that are healthy, but they don't have well being. And on the other hand, I think you can think of people who have really compromised health, and it may be because they're living with a chronic disease or illness, but they exude well being in their life. And that's often because these other areas are very strong in their life. And one of those areas is purpose. And, as I'll go deeper into purpose and meaning is so important at every age and stage of life. Relationships are also core to well being. We know in the United States there's a lot of depression. Actually, there's more loneliness than depression. And the health risks of being alone are comparable to the risks associated with high blood pressure, obesity, other sort of serious chronic diseases. So, having human connectedness and having relationships is core to our well being. Community is important to our well being in so many respects. The community that we live in, the people that are around us, nurture and sustain us. Feeling safe and secure is important to our well being. So, if we have fear for any reason, that can erode our well being. And then the final area is the environment. And when I think of environment, I think of not just clean air, clean water, but the built environment has an impact. And increasingly, we're looking at the impact of the environment from even a climate perspective. And actually, the climate perspective affects all of those areas of well being. So, well being is a whole person perspective. It's about increasing people's capacity and expanding their potential. And I think one thing that's so important to understand is that we can be cultivating well being in our life despite having chronic illness and maturing bodies. Sometimes when I'm speaking to a group and it's a group of older people, they'll sort of say that wellness stuff, that health and wellness, that's just for young people, healthy people. But actually, when you start talking about well being, that is actually what people are deeply yearning for in their life. And you can think of well being at an individual level, at a family level, the well being of the family, at an organization, community, even at a national level. And there are countries now around the world that are establishing well being indices. So, certainly, a diagnosis of cancer is a time of pause. And so, for many, it's a time of deep introspection, learning, and also a time of growth. So, it's a very common time to be rethinking every aspect of your life, including rethinking purpose. And so, questions that often will come up when people start to rethink their purpose is, what's most important now? What holds meaning in my life? And it's also a big time of rethinking priorities. What do I really care about? What's most important? And so I'm going to talk about what is purpose, why it matters, and then some strategies to explore and deepen purpose in your life. So, stepping back, what is purpose? I would ask you the question, what gets you up in the morning? And so, purpose is your aim, it's your direction in life. It is often different from a job or career. Some people live out their purpose within their job or career, but for many, purpose is something that even goes beyond that. One of the things that's so important to understand is that purpose matters at every age and stage of life. Sometimes people think, oh, well, purpose, that's something that you figure out when you're maybe in your late teens or early 20s, and you figure out what you're going to be when you grow up, and that's purpose. But people who've actually studied adult development have said, you know what, it's very natural and normal to be rethinking purpose at about every decade of life. So there's age old questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? What do I care about? what's my purpose in life, that it's normal to be rethinking these questions periodically. Richard Leiter, who actually is a Minnesotan, and he's written the book, The Power of Purpose. And first edition came out about 30 years ago. And this has been translated, this book, into 20 some different languages. I think there's been, I don't know, 15 editions of this book. It's an amazing book, The Power of Purpose. And Richard actually is a senior fellow at the Early Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. So Richard and I have worked really closely over the years. And I love what Richard writes about purpose. He said, the secret to having a fully alive life is to reframe those life questions over and over and over again. And so this is the cover of his book, The Power of the Purpose, meaning, finding meaning, living longer and living better. Richard, when he was fairly young in his career, received a Bush Fellowship, and he did research, and he interviewed people over the age of 65, and he asked them one question: if you had your life to do over, what would you do differently? And this is what they said: that they would be more reflective, that they would be more courageous, and that they would be clear earlier about purpose in their lives. For many years, Richard and I collaborated, and we held purpose workshops, purpose retreats. And initially, those retreats were were framed for people in the second half of life. So people maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s, thinking like, "What am I going to do next in life?" And invariably, what happened is when people came to those workshops, they said, gosh, I wish I would have had this earlier. I wish this was available for my children, my grandchildren, to be thinking about these questions of purpose. Another analogy we often use when defining purpose and the fact that our purpose evolves and grows over time is to think of purpose like a nautilus shell. So a nautilus, is in those shells, and a nautilus, as it grows, continues to actually has to build new chambers. And so, and that too is somewhat like our life. That as we evolve and grow as human beings, it's not unreasonable for us to need new chambers and to be kind of rethinking everything around us. There's more and more research evolving on the connection between purpose, well-being, and longevity. And there's one study that I want to highlight because it's really an interesting one. It was funded by the National Institute of Aging. They did a study of over 6,000 people, and they found that people who had a greater sense of purpose and direction in their life were more likely to outlive their peers. And look at this second sort of line here. People with a sense of purpose had a 15% lower risk of death compared to those who said they were aimless. Now, if we were in a room together, I might say to you, what happens to people who retire and have no plans? And invariably, one of you would raise your hand and probably say they're more likely to die. And in fact, that's true, that people who retire and have no plans are at a higher risk of mortality. And the belief is that that's really connected to this whole notion of purpose and meaning. So, how to go about thinking about your purpose and meaning? I'm going to give you a very simple formula, looking at your gifts, your passions, and your values, and look at how that can be translated into a purpose, or some refer to it even as a calling. What is it that I'm called to do in my life? So I'm hoping that maybe, you have a notepad next to you or a piece of paper that you can be really applying this to your own life and really be thinking this through for yourself. Let's look first at that whole notion of gifts. What are your gifts? And gifts often emerge naturally and early in our lives. They show up as the things that we love to do. Gifts are natural. So skills are learned. You go back to school and you acquire knowledge and you acquire skills, but gifts are those natural abilities. So think about, even as you were growing up, what is it that, your parents noticed about you, your friends noticed about you, um, uh, And what do others observe you doing that you are able to do effortlessly and superbly? So those tend to be some of the natural gifts that you have. Your passions are what you care deeply about. So think about what is important to you, what moves you, what inspires you, what's worth doing. And then maybe even ask yourself the big question, what is it that life is asking you to do? Again, at where you are right now in your life, what is it that life is asking or inviting you to do? So, looking at your gifts, your passions, and then your values, what is it that you stand for, and what do you care deeply about? And so that can be, a one way to really be discerning your purpose. So your purpose is what you love to do. It's how you like to serve. When you know you have found your purpose, when you are losing yourself in whatever task or piece of work that you're doing, your calling is often found in the things that you love to do for other people. And so I think a big question to ask yourself is, are you using your gifts on things that you care about, that fit with your values, and in an environment that supports you? So, somebody who's written a lot about purpose is the author and writer and teacher, Parker Palmer. And Parker Palmer talks a lot about this whole notion of a divided life. So he's written many books. Let Your Life Speak is one, A Journey Toward Wholeness is another. And Parker talks about the fact that many of us have, kind of haven't maybe learned or have been socialized to live a divided life, a life in which our words and our actions conceal or even contradict truths that we hold inwardly. So, in some respects, something is holding us back from showing up in the world as we truly and authentically are. And that sadly, many of us learn early in life that it's not safe to be in the world as we really are, with what we truly believe and what we truly value. And when we are living a divided life, we are living behind a mask. And I'm sure that some of you have had an encounter being with somebody who lives behind a mask. They're not real. They're not. They're. It's and they're not authentic. Perhaps you have a relative that's like that, or a colleague, or a teacher. Maybe you've encountered a healthcare provider. It's very hard to establish trust with such a person. And actually, the person who leads a divided life also suffers and suffers deeply. Every time that we show up as our true selves, that is really a way to reclaim our identity, who we are, as well as our integrity. And when we're able to live an undivided life, it's those moments where new life can really grow within and between and around us. So, applying that to the whole notion of purpose, I'm inviting you to really think about this question. Are you showing up in the world as your true self? Are you living a life that is true to your values? And are you using your gifts in a way that is aligned with your identity and with your integrity? So, a way to pull this together is, what Richard refers to as the good life. And, this whole notion of the good life has been written about by philosophers, through the centuries. And so many philosophers will have, big definitions of what's the good life. But I love the simplicity of this definition, that it's living in the place you belong with the people that you love, doing the right work on purpose. And so as you think about that and be framing it as living in the place you belong, so that might be a physical place, that might be a geographical space, that might be the people that are surrounding you, that you're with people that care about you. And doing the right work doesn't necessarily mean a job or career, but you're doing what it is that you're called to be doing in this life. And you're feeling like you can fulfill, what your sense of purpose is. So a very simple, definition of the good life. So what are some simple next steps? My invitation to you is to actually do some ongoing reflection. I think this is a topic that is really good to reflect on, maybe journal on, and ask yourself, where do opportunities exist for you to cultivate a deeper purpose and meaning in your life? One of the exercises when I said that Richard and I used to do purpose workshops is that we actually encourage people to write a purpose statement. And we sometimes give them journal prompts to do that. I get up in the morning to dot, dot, dot. What is it that gets you up in the morning? Or I gain a sense of purpose when. So, what are the things that you do in the world where you are actually really feeling like you're serving and giving back and it has deep meaning for you? Those are kind of stems that you can use to kind of, help you as you, reflect on purpose. But Richard said there's also a really good default purpose. So take this and write it on the sticky note and put it on your mirror, until you distill maybe more clearly or specifically your purpose. A really good default purpose to have in this life is to grow and to give. And so every day, if you think about what are the ways that you can grow and what are the ways that you can give, that actually may nudge you closer to what your ultimate purpose is. Well, before we get into Q&A, I want to talk about some resources that I think might be helpful to you. And I think many of these resources will also be on the website, for the conference today. There's a website called Taking Charge of Your Health and Well-Being. And this is a site that the Bakken Center has had for, probably at least 10 years. And it actually introduces you to this whole well-being model. But you can actually do, if you're interested in purpose, a much deeper dive. And so each of those areas, the gifts, the passions, the values, you can actually do an assessment. You can set a goal that it'll prompt you to kind of, things that you might consider and look at. You don't need a password to get on this website. It doesn't save any of your data. We get 250,000 unique visitors every month on this website from all around the world. I think it's an amazing resource. And my encouragement to you would be actually to do an assessment of your well-being, looking at all of these areas. So look at purpose, but look at these other areas as well. And I actually I often encourage people to do this with some friends, do this with some buddies, maybe pull a small group together, and each week pick one of these wedges that you're going to do a deeper dive in, looking at how is that showing up in your life. And so there's also information on this website on managing health conditions and exploring holistic or integrative practices. There's another website that my colleague, Dr. Megan Voss and Dr. Mo Anderson have created called Taking Charge of Your Survivorship. And so if you haven't seen this website, well, this website was designed for, adolescents and young adults. It actually it focuses on so many topics of survivorship that are pertinent no matter what the age. So it focuses on living with and beyond cancer diagnosis and treatment. And you'll see there's content on well-being, content on transitions, and ways to explore support. So this is a companion to the Taking Charge of Your Health and Well-Being website. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I also gave you access to a well-being guide that we developed about a year ago, and it's just titled Wellbeing 101, Tips and Strategies to Help You Focus on Your Well-Being. And there's all kinds of tips on everything from healthy eating tips to exercise and movement tips to tips how to sleep better. A lot of focus on stress and ways to more effectively manage your stress. And so that's a resource as well. And what I wanted to do is end with a practice that's in that well-being guide. And I think I gave you this card as well. a gratitude practice. And so there's a lot of research on the impact of gratitude in our lives. In fact, I actually published a study that was done on the Caring Bridge website. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Caring Bridge, and we did a study where we invited people that either were an author on the Caring Bridge website or were a friend visiting that website to engage in a 21-day practice of gratitude. And we looked at outcomes. And this is what the gratitude practice looks like. It's called Three Good Things. Once a day, maybe before you go to bed at night or when you get up in the morning, write down three things that you're grateful for. And we think it's helpful to write them down once a week. Look back at what you've written down and just begin to notice the patterns that are showing up in your life. What we found when we did this study, and it was about 800 people that participated in this study on Caring Bridge, we did find that gratitude was associated with reducing stress. And the reason we believe is because when you have a practice of gratitude, it helps you cultivate a more positive mood state. It also helped people feel develop a deeper sense of connectedness. And we were looking at social connectedness. So, with that, Kareem, I am going to pull down my slides and I'm really happy to answer any questions that might have come up.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mary Jo. I do have and see a few questions have come through. So Mary Jo, first question that came through was about what you would recommend to someone who is at the point in their life where they feel confident about their calling or their purpose, but now a second calling is creeping into their life. What would you say or recommend in that scenario?
I would say, can we pay attention to that? So I think it's really important, to pay attention to that. And I think that's really what Parker Palmer writes about when he says, it's not healthy to lead a divided life. And so if we have a deep yearning, something that we feel called to do, um, rather than live a life of regrets, why didn't I pursue that? Why didn't I, take that fork in the road? My encouragement you would be to explore it. And that doesn't necessarily mean abandoning, what you have been doing, what you felt like your initial purpose and calling in life was, but give your life space to fully explore it. And the other thing I'd encourage you to do is make a conscious choice. Sometimes we just accept things in life as a default and we don't really think about them. Richard and I used to say, sometimes people spend more time planning their vacation than planning their life. So, taking your life seriously and what it is you want to be doing with this one precious life, is really worthy of doing.
Terrific. Thank you for those thoughts. The next question touches on one specific area of purpose. Can you comment on faith-based lives and strength of purpose and how that may answer so many of these questions, the great questions you posed for us today?
Yeah, actually, Kareem, for many people, their purpose and meaning in life is deeply rooted in their religious or faith tradition. And so I think for some, their religious beliefs or their faith, offers them a whole structure in life that is almost inseparable, from their purpose and meaning. And if you look across the spectrum at religious and faith traditions, what they have in common often are two things. One, they call us to something higher than ourselves. And so, that helps us shift from rather just a focus on me, myself, to sort of a focus on something bigger. And really, all religious and faith traditions have an orientation to service and serving others. And I think those two things are incredibly positive and incredibly important. A lot has been written, Kareem, about the healing power of doing good. And that there's, again, like I was talking about, there's research on gratitude. There's also a lot of research on even the power of volunteering, the power of service, and that when we do those things, we not only help others, but honestly, we're doing so much to help ourselves as well.
That's a perfect segue to the next question, which was a specific situation. So our attendee writes, on the eve of my retirement from an academic career, I had no, in quotes, retirement plan. And then I survived acute myeloid leukemia, AML, and found a second career or calling as a peer volunteer, a patient advocate, someone facilitating writing workshops. So, again, I found, in quotes, my purpose, retirement activity without actually ever planning ahead. Of course, the attendee says, I would not recommend the cancer part, but it worked out for me. What are your thoughts about these more spontaneous, unplanned turns in our lives that can take us to a second or additional purpose?
Oh, Kareem, I think it's so important to see those things as opportunities and as gifts we should be paying attention to. And so this, was a beautiful from Steve kind of, reflection on sort of an opening that he had because he saw that because of his own personal life experience with cancer, that he had probably developed, insight and awareness that he was aware could be helpful to others. And so, what a powerful way for him to be able to share his insight, to be of help to others. And so, that's where at the very beginning of the talk, I said, be open to triggers, be open to thresholds in life when you're sort of crossing from one place to another, because those often are very natural times to be rethinking purpose.
That makes me think of a comment actually that I saw in the chat storm through the talk about, when is the right time or the ideal time, if such a thing exists, to ask these questions of your purpose. The chat mentions, is there a better time to use purpose questions that were shared? For instance, when one has been, let or just been notified about a cancer diagnosis, or as someone completes treatment. Talk about that timeline through a cancer journey, where these may fit in.
Well, it's actually a really interesting question, Kareem, and it's a good question to ask. And, I would say that there's not a timeline for when to ask the questions of purpose, just like there's not a timeline for grief. I do a lot of work around grief and loss, as well. And sometimes people will say, like, what's the timeline? And it's like, everybody has a personal experience and there are natural steps and stages that you go through, but there is not a timeline. And I actually feel that same way, Kareem, around purpose. The best time to be thinking about purpose is when it's coming up for you. So to pay attention to that inner voice, that inner calling, and that's, that poem I shared with you at the beginning from John O'Donohue, he was talking about, listening to that and being aware of that. And so when you are naturally kind of feeling those things surfacing, that's when to kind of take a step back. And honestly, I sometimes encourage people keep a purpose journal. It's so interesting to actually be able to kind of look at um, when and why and how questions are coming up for you. And sometimes then even going back and looking at your own journal can offer you a lot of insight.
That's great advice. Things don't always work on the timeline we envision.
Not at all. Not at
So
all.
true. Well, here's a great question that came through regarding, but isn't it possible to have more than one purpose in life? How does that fit in to the paradigm or great information you shared with us?
Absolutely. And purpose is what gives us, meaning in our life. And of course, there would be more things than just, just one thing. And so I don't think people should feel any, sort of sense of expectation or pressure that you should only have, one purpose. Like there might be a whole lot of things that give your life meaning. Somebody wrote in the chat, nature has helped me find purpose in life after cancer treatment. It's been a journey. And so, I mean, that's a huge discovery. And there's my gosh, Kareem, we could spend all day talking about the healing effects of nature because that's a huge, really important, exciting topic. But often, even though there's lots of things that give us purpose and meaning, I, notice somebody else talked about feeling a call to want to travel, and that can give people, purpose and meaning in life as well. And so I think that's a little different than trying to distill the deeper question that we've also been exploring, like, what am I here to do? And how do I want to show up? How do I want to use my, gifts to, to serve? And so, both are important to explore.
That is great advice. We only have a few minutes left, but I see we have at least one final question. I'll make sure we touch on. If not time for more, we'll get to them. I promise, as time permits. Doug asked, "I'm a stage 4 survivor since 2016. I feel a calling to travel, to explore, and I'd also like to live somewhere else." He's a golf nut, so he says Pinehurst, North Carolina. "Given I've lived in Minnesota my entire life. However, my spouse doesn't share that desire. Any advice on how we might find a happy medium?" This might be finding my purpose in the context of multi-person units, family structures, and other type of collective groups.
Yeah. Well, when you have a life partner, whether it's, somebody that you, have been married with, in this case, sort of a spouse, it certainly is interesting to kind of explore that definition of the good life together. And so think again about sort of that definition of the good life, living in the place I belong with the people I love, doing the right work on purpose. So kind of the living in the place you want to live or living in the place you feel like you belong is only kind of one factor to look at, but certainly I think exploring, sort of the different perceptions you both have of each of those 4 areas would be important. And so I guess that's one thing I would encourage you to do is, so, the drive to live in a particular place might be meaningful and fulfilling and contribute to kind of your sense of a good life. But those other things are also really important. And so, as you look at those and as your wife or your spouse looks at those, um, look for similarities and differences.
I have 2 questions here I think I can combine about how do you know your purpose is the right one for you, with the follow-up or next question, which talked about how do you understand what your natural gifts are? We like to think we're all unique and have gifts, but the attendee says, "I'm not sure I have any gifts different than anyone else." This is maybe about personalizing
Yeah,
these
no, I
concepts.
actually love that question, Kareem. And, one of the things I often say, and I didn't say it today, so this question gave me the opportunity to say it, is I think it's helpful for, as you're exploring this topic, to have a sounding board. And I don't mean like a board that you convene, like a board of directors, but actually find people that care about you, that are interesting, that will be honest and give you feedback, and have some deep conversations with them and ask people these questions, because sometimes it's not just the insight we have, it's feedback that we can get from others. And so my encouragement, to the person who asked this question, is to find some people who, that you can have a purpose conversation with. And again, on the Taking Charge of Your Health and Wellbeing website, we have a definition of the sounding board and why having a sounding board is important. And so, actually, you could even use that as a tool to have a deeper conversation with somebody. I didn't talk so much, Kareem, about, I talked about relationships are important and there's a lot of loneliness, but it's so important in life to have people that, you know, that you love and that love you. And so I often say to people, it's really important to have people in your life that you can turn to when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're puzzled, when you've got, sort of questions on your mind. And so I think, cultivating that circle is really important for health and well-being.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you to all of our attendees. As we saw in the chat storm that was described, this presentation is eye-opening, empowering opportunities, with some great gratitude expressed to you, Mary Jo. And thank you everyone for your participation. We'll see you at the next session. Bye now.
Yeah, bye-bye.